weeks ago, in a quiet, suburban neighbourhood, nestled between rows of identical houses with perfectly trimmed lawns, there was a home that stood out not for its appearance, but for what happened inside. It was a house filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of mundane chaos that comes with raising a family. The kind of place where you'd expect nothing more sinister than a burnt casserole or a spilled glass of milk. But this house, this family, would soon learn that darkness doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it walks right through your front door. It all started on a crisp autumn afternoon. The family, a mother, a father, and their 2 young children were sitting in their cosy living room, the kind of room that smells like cinnamon and feels like safety. The television was on, but no one was really watching. The father was scrolling through his phone, the mother was flipping through a magazine, and the kids were sprawled on the floor, building a tower of blocks that would inevitably topple. "You know," the father said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "we should really get some help around the house. It's getting harder to keep up with everything." The mother looked up, her brow furrowed. "A maid? Really? Do we need one?" "Why not?" he replied, leaning back in his chair. "We've been talking about it for months. It's not like we can't afford it. And think about itless cleaning, more time for us, maybe even a date night once in a while." The idea hung in the air, tempting and practical. The kids, oblivious to the conversation, continued their block building, but the parents exchanged a look. A silent agreement passed between them. "Okay," the mother said finally, a small smile playing on her lips. "Let's do it." The maid arrived a week later. Her name was Clara, and she was everything they could have asked for: efficient, polite, and eerily good at her job. She moved through the house like a ghost, cleaning every corner, folding every piece of laundry, and even cooking meals that tasted like they'd come from a 5-star restaurant. The family was thrilled. "She's amazing," the mother said one evening as they sat around the dinner table. "I don't know how we ever managed without her." "I know," the father replied, cutting into a perfectly roasted chicken. "It's like she's always one step ahead of us. Did you see how she organized the pantry today? It's almost too good to be true." The words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken unease, but they brushed it off. After all, who complains about perfection? The first sign that something was wrong came a few days later. The mother was in the kitchen, sipping her morning coffee, when she noticed something strange. The knives in the block were arranged in a peculiar pattern, smallest to largest, but with the largest knife turned upside down. She frowned, her fingers hovering over the handle. "Clara?" she called out, her voice echoing through the empty house. The maid appeared in the doorway, her expression calm, almost too calm. "Yes, ma'am? Did you rearrange the knives?" Clara tilted her head, her dark eyes unreadable. "No, ma'am. They were like that when I came in." The mother nodded, but the explanation didn't sit right. She opened her mouth to say something, but Clara was already gone, her footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. The signs grew harder to ignore. Clara began speaking to herself, her whispers barely audible, but filled with an intensity that sent chills down the family's spines. She would disappear for hours, only to be found in the most unexpected places, standing in the basement, staring at the wall or sitting in the children's room, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Do you think she's okay?" the father asked one night, his voice low as they lay in bed. "I don't know," the mother replied, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "But she's so good with the kids, and the house has never been cleaner. Maybe she's just eccentric." The father nodded, but his eyes were troubled. They both knew they were making excuses, but it was easier than admitting the truth. Easier than confronting the woman who had become such an integral part of their lives. The breaking point came late one night. The house was cloaked in an unnatural silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive. The parents were asleep when they heard a faint, high-pitched cry coming from the nursery. The mother bolted upright, her heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" The father was already out of bed, his face pale in the moonlight. "It's coming from the kids' room." They rushed down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. The nursery door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the hall. The mother pushed it open, her breath catching in her throat. Clara was standing in the corner, her back to them. In her hand, a knife glinted under the pale moonlight. "Clara?" the mother whispered, her voice trembling. The maid didn't move. She just stood there, her shoulders shaking with silent laughter. When she finally turned around, her face was wrong, twisted. Her eyes were hollow, her smile too wide, too sharp. "You shouldn't have ignored me," she said, her voice a guttural growl that didn't sound human. The father stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Clara, put the knife down. Let's talk about this." But she didn't listen. Her laughter echoed through the house, a haunting sound that would stay with them long after the knife fell from her hand. The police came, the reports were filed, and Clara was taken away. But the damage was done. The family moved out of the house soon after, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched, that Clara's presence still lingered in the shadows. Sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the monsters under the bed or the ghosts in the attic. They're the ones we invite into our homes, our lives, without ever really knowing who or what they are. And Clara, she was so much more than a maid. It started like any ordinary day. A family, happy and settled in their warm, inviting home, brought a new nanny into their lives. She was everything they could have asked for: efficient, polite, and dependable. She seemed like the perfect fit for their household. But as they would soon discover, perfection can be a dangerous illusion. A mask concealing something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. At first, everything seemed fine. The nanny, Clara, was a dream. She kept the house spotless, cooked meals that could rival a 5-star restaurant, and most importantly, she adored the children. But then the mother began to notice small things. Unexplained bruises on her infant daughter's arms. Behavioural changisher, once cheerful baby now, cried incessantly. Her toddler son began having night terrors. And then there were the missing items. A pacifier here, a blanket there. Small things, easily explained away. The mother tried to brush it off. Kids get bruises, babies cry. Things go missing, but deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her intuition screamed at her, but without concrete evidence, she felt paralysed. That's when she decided to take matters into her own hands. She installed cameras around the house, determined to catch whoever was causing these disturbances. But every time she reviewed the footage, it was either mysteriously corrupted or showed nothing out of the ordinary. Just Clara, going about her day, smiling that perfect, unnerving smile. Then the discoveries began. Burned clothing hidden in the attic. Strange symbols etched into the walls behind the children's beds. Ritualistic items buried in the garden dolls with their eyes sewn shut. Candles made of black wax and jars filled with what looked like hair. The mother's unease turned to outright terror. But every time she confronted Clara, the nanny had an explanation. A plausible, reasonable explanation that made the mother question her own sanity. The breaking point came one night when the mother woke to the sound of her daughter crying. She rushed to the nursery, only to find Clara standing over the crib, her back turned. In her hand was a knife, glinting in the moonlight. The mother screamed, and Clara turned around, her face calm, her smile serene. "I was just checking on her," Clara said, her voice soft, almost soothing. But the mother didn't believe her. She couldn't. Not after everything she'd seen. She fired Clara on the spot, demanding she leave and never return. But as Clara walked out the door, she turned and said something that would haunt the mother forever. "You'll see. She's mine now." The mother thought it was over. She thought they were safe. But the next morning, she found her daughter's crib empty. Panic set in as she searched the house, calling out her daughter's name. And then she heard it. A faint giggle coming from the attic. She climbed the stairs, her heart pounding, and pushed open the door, only to find her daughter sitting in the centre of a circle of black candles, surrounded by the same ritualistic items she'd found buried in the garden. And standing over her was Clara, her face twisted into a grotesque smile. The mother lunged forward, grabbing her daughter and running out of the house. She never looked back. But to this day, she swears she can still hear Clara's voice, whispering in the shadows, promising to come back for what's hers. Sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the monsters under the bed or the ghosts in the attic. They're the ones we invite into our homes, our lives, without ever really knowing who or what they are. It was the kind of house that made you believe in fairy tales. Nestled at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street, it stood like a relic from another timer-sprawling, historic home with ivy crawling up its brick walls and a wraparound porch that seemed to whisper stories of the past. The family for a mother, a father, and their 2 young children had fallen in love with it the moment they saw it. It was charming, full of character, and, to their surprise, surprisingly affordable. "It's perfect," the mother had said, her voice filled with awe as they walked through the empty rooms. "Too perfect," the father had replied, a hint of unease in his tone. "Why hasn't anyone bought it yet?" The realtor, a cheerful woman with a too bright smile, had waved off their concerns. "Oh, it's just been waiting for the right family, and I think that's you." They moved in a week later, their excitement overshadowing the nagging feeling that something was off. The house was beautiful, yes, but it felt alive, like it was watching them. The first sign that something was wrong came on their second night. The mother woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. She sat up, her heart pounding, and shook her husband awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. He groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Hear what?" The footsteps stopped. The house was silent. "Never mind," she said, lying back down. But she didn't sleep. The next morning, she walked into the kitchen, and froze. The dishes they'd left in the sink were clean and put away. The counters sparkled. The floors gleamed. "Did you do this?" she asked her husband, her voice trembling. He shook his head, his face pale. "I thought you did." They laughed it off, chalking it up to stress or forgetfulness. But deep down, they both knew something was wrong. The strange occurrences continued. Clothes would be folded and put away in drawers they never used. Personal items, photos, jewellery, even underwear would be rearranged in ways that felt invasive. And then there were the meals. The family would come home to find dinner prepared, but no one had cooked it. The food was always cold, as if it had been sitting out for hours. Or longer. "Maybe it's a neighbour," the mother suggested one evening, her voice shaky as she stared at the perfectly set table. "Maybe someone's playing a prank. Or maybe it's Miss Lucy," their daughter chimed in, her eyes wide with excitement. "Who's Miss Lucy?" the father asked, his brow furrowed. "The maid," their daughter replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She used to live here. She takes care of us now." The parents exchanged a look, their unease growing. The breaking point came one night when the mother woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was a woman in an old-fashioned maid's uniform, her face pale and her eyes hollow. She was holding a stack of linens, her expression blank. The mother screamed, and the figure vanished. But the next morning she found her daughter's room rearranged. The furniture had been moved, the toys organised in a way that felt ritualistic. And on the wall, written in what looked like ash, were the words, "I'll take care of her." The family tried to leave. They packed their bags and stayed at a hotel. But when they returned, the house was perfect. Too perfect. The floors were polished, the beds made, the table set for dinner. And in the centre of the dining room, sitting on a silver platter, was a single blackened photograph. It was of the maid, standing beside a family that looked eerily similar to theirs. But the family in the photo, they weren't smiling. Their faces were frozen in expressions of pure terror. The mother finally did some research and discovered the truth. The maid, Miss Lucy, had died in the house over a century ago. She had been murdered while trying to protect the children of the family she served. But her spirit had never left. She was still bound to the house, still performing her duties. And now she had chosen a new family to serve, or rather, to replace. The family tried to leave again, but the doors wouldn't open. The windows were sealed shut. And as they huddled together in the living room, they heard it. The sound of footsteps, slowly climbing the stairs. The maid was coming for them, and this time she wasn't here to clean.